I'm joined now by Lord Robert Haywood, Conservative peer and pollster. Great to have you on the programme, Lord Haywood. Let's talk about 5 years of Sir Keir Starmer as Labour leader. If you were to come up with sort of, a sort of headline sentence of what Starmer as leader of Labour is like, what sort of words might you be using?
I think it's probably a case of looking at his first few months of government. And there's no question it's the most unpopular incoming government that this country and most countries have ever had. And that, unfortunately for him, summarises his 5 years, because he set out to become Prime Minister, he's become Prime Minister, and it's been a pretty awful experience for him and for the country.
I mean, why is that? Is it that he's dull? Does he lack charisma? Is it that he's technocratic? Is it that actually we all get a sense there's a sort of rather mean streak in him, something that lacks empathy and emotion?
I don't think it's a mean streak. That's the only word of your comments that I probably disagree with. He does lack empathy, and he's had speech training under very questionable circumstances during COVID. And if I was him, I'd have asked for my money back, because the general message is that he can't convey his message. And as we're chatting, yesterday, the anniversary of his 5 years, Labour lost 2 council by-elections in huge swings. And you said about woke Westminster, one of the Labour councillors has defected overnight to the Conservatives. So it's not a very happy anniversary for him.
Let's talk actually about polling and the direction of travel at the moment, because you said Labour Party probably got some of the worst polling of any sort of fairly fresh government. They're not so fresh these days. But what are the polls looking like now? Because there does seem to now be a sustained three-way split at the top, with the runners and riders, taking it in turns to be top dog, other than the Conservative Party, who I don't think have led in the polls for, well, goodness knows how long. You are a pollster. Where are the various parties standing in your opinion?
Pretty neck and neck is the answer. The three parties, all vying to be leader of the pack. I think it's fair to say that actually all 3 parties have actually led in one opinion poll or another in the last 10 days. So it is very much a case of neck and neck. But one shouldn't forget the Liberal Democrats, who are a few points behind, but very, very successful at targeting their particular areas. And they did unbelievably well at the general election on that basis. But yeah, all 3 parties vying with each other. We've got the elections on May the 1st, and we will find out at that point who is actually the leader of that pack, because the reality is opinion polls are not accurate. They are directional in terms of the trend of public opinion.
I want to talk to you about, let's say, Reform UK, because a lot of viewers and listeners of this show often message me about Reform UK. Do you think those internal divisions, the fallouts in the party, had any dent on their performance in the polls, or has that not really had any sort of wider ramifications when it comes to the success of that party?
No, it's not had any major impact. As far as the public are concerned, they sign up to Reform primarily because of Nigel Farage and the appeal that he has on a populist basis. A row involving him and somebody who, to be honest, most of the population have never heard of, actually doesn't impact unless it specifically is at Nigel Farage and goes on for a long period of time. But no, you're right, there's no evidence at the moment that it's had any marked effect.
When it comes to airtime, does this help or hinder a party? Because I say that because I was listening to the BBC this morning, and they were talking about one of their flagship political programmes, and as per usual, they had someone from the Conservative Party lined up to be on it, someone from the Labour Party lined up to be on it, and then some various characters. And certainly when it comes to the regulations of balance, it's always been calculated on the basis of how many seats in Parliament and last election results, which means that by and large smaller parties and entryist parties like Reform don't get the airtime. Does that, do you think, help them? Because actually there's less there for people to pick at and be upset about. That sort of lack of exposure actually is a protective barrier, or is it a hindrance?
I think it's probably a protective barrier, because at the moment, one of the big criticisms of reform is that it's relatively policy light, and where they have come up with policies, I'm not convinced that they'd actually be attractive to large numbers of people. And therefore, it's probably better to not be persistently on the likes of the programmes you were referring to just now. There's also the issue of, if you don't follow the route that you identified, i.e. the government and the major opposition party, trying to provide some form of balance in another way is very difficult. Having said that, and I was a Remainer, I'm very critical of the way the BBC and other television programmes persistently did not have people who supported Brexit on. They just seemed to go out of their way to have, on a thing like Any Questions or Question Time, what I would regard as inappropriate, imbalanced panels.
I know the inappropriate imbalance panels are a thing that still blights, I think, particularly the BBC, who we all hold to a higher level, perhaps, because of the funding that it gets. Let's talk about young people, OK? A report I'd say saying that 500,000 young people, 500,000 young people between 18 and 25 have never actually worked. I find this really shocking. Most of those not in education, employment or training are also not looking for a job, and an increasing number are saying sickness is the main reason. And one has to assume when it comes to sickness, when you're between 18 and 25, that isn't necessarily a bad back and arthritis and aches and pains and cancer treatment. It's likely to be things going on inside their skulls, isn't it? This is really alarming. What do you think is going on?
I'm not a medic and I'm not a psychoanalyst, but there's no question in my mind. One has to put the figure in context, by the way. You're talking about 500,000 in a fairly narrow age group, and there are less than 1 million babies born each year in this country. So it's a pretty high proportion.
Wow.
Of the population that you're talking about. And it is extremely worrying, because not only how they're defining themselves or being defined as sick, but also, as was indicated earlier on in your comments, that actually it has implications for these people for the rest of their lives. They develop a lifestyle, a mentality, an approach. They don't have the finances behind them. So there's a real problem for society in general if people become habitually unemployed.
Right, I mean, actually, I'm glad you talked about that, because looking at this report in front of me, it's sort of 31% have cited ill health as the primary reason. And again, you know, tends to be mental health reasons. If I were, and you're a pollster, you're someone who can look at data and look at statistics and graphs and perhaps draw positive correlations, patterns and trends, it would seem to me that one thing this generation has had in their life that I didn't, the generation above them, is the constant use of technology, of smartphones, of social media, of things that preoccupy the brain and have been proven basically to create spikes in anxiety or change the way that we seek affirmation. And when you've got a third of this generation saying they're too sick to work, to even go to work, are we looking essentially at a public health crisis that we're failing to address?
Yeah, I was chuckling just now because you commented about my looking at statistics. Some people might describe me as incredibly sad at the amount of time I look at the statistics, but they do show all sorts of information, which you've referred to there. And there is no question that people are identified as being sick in a way that your generation or my generation were not identified, because people have to cope with things. And we will ultimately cope with social media and all the difficulties that that causes. And society in general, not just in Britain, is having a difficulty. But the important matter, which you've not touched on, is that other countries do not have the same proportion of people of that age group who are deemed to be sick. Right. And the question you have to ask is why?
Why?
And the answer is because we have a mentality that says we will sign off, we will support people, which is unacceptable in other countries. And we have to recognise that's a problem and change it.
Yeah, I get the impression that something that's going wrong in our country and in the West in general, of people sort of being inundated by various social media things, YouTube videos, everyone's self-diagnosing conditions. Oh, I've got OCD, I've got ADHD, oh, I'm in a toxic relationship. These are the red flags. Oh, I think I've got a health condition. We're so bombarded by information that we've become so sovereign in going out looking for any problems we may have mentally, socially, in terms of our relationships, medically, that everyone kind of thinks they're walking around in some sort of doom loop when actually their life's probably okay. Right, stay where you are, Lord Hayward. Let's invite Peter from Worthing into the conversation to join us today. Peter, hello. How are you, my darling?
Alex, this is wonderful. I've been waiting so long to speak to you. You've been in my living room on so many occasions.
Oh.
So I feel like an old friend.
Oh.
On the TV, of course. I'd like to sing my Starmer song, which is, if you like, Vaughan Munro's tribute to the great man. And if you remember the Die Hard films, he always sings at the end, you know?
I've never seen the Die Hard film. Believe it or not, I'm one of those weird people who doesn't watch films. But when someone phones me up and says, I'm going to sing you a song live on air, the answer is always, yes, do it. Take it away, Peter.
And I've got a friend to help me count it in, all right?
Okay, great.
3, 2, 1. Oh, thank you. Now the Westminster scene is frightful, and their policies are spiteful. But Starmer doesn't want to know. Let him go, let him go, let him go. He shows no sign of stopping, though the pensioners are dropping. The economy's way down low. Let him go, let him go, let him go. With the family budget tight, there's just not enough kids being born. But we finally seen the light. So next time we're voting reform, with Rayner, Reeves and Lammy, we've got a triple whammy of amateurs running the show. Let them go, for pity's sake, let them go. Yippee-ki-yay, mugs and suckers.
Amazing! I got my jazz hands out for that crescendo at the end. I thought you were going to hit that top note. Round of applause. That was amazing. Lord Hayward, do you think that's going to be the next Christmas #1? It did seem to have a festive feel to it, which doesn't quite match the season we're in now. Would you go out and buy that record?
Probably not, but please don't ask me to sing. I'm wonderful at singing when I'm with 82,000 other people in Twickenham, but on a solo, no.
Well, do you know, maybe you can take lessons from Peter in Worthing there. What a gorgeous, crisp voice. It took me back to the golden age of the crooners. Thank you ever so much for joining me, Lord Robert Hayward.